Hello, everybody. I know we're nearing time of start. We'll get started in a few minutes. I imagine many people are kind of filing into the physical room there in Sweden. Greetings from Baltimore, Maryland, slash Bethesda, Maryland. My name's Anthony Juni, and joined by many co-chairs here. Just wanted to greet you all and say hello, and just say we'll get started here as people start filing in and everybody gets settled in. So for those that are on the virtual Zoom, greetings and welcome.
Greeting, thank you, Anton.
So, welcome everybody. Thanks a lot for being here. This is the session on the data for sustainable development and responsible research, co-chaired by the interest group on RDA for the sustainable development goals and also the data for development. I am really...
Sorry, can you just move the mic a bit closer?
I moved the microphone.
Yeah, just closer.
Closer, it's
yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's difficult to look in the one direction and talk in the other one, probably. If you have a microphone that I can carry too, I could probably have that too, so that I could, I tend to move my head a lot back and forth, so probably that's the best way. Okay, so welcome again. I won't repeat what I just said, but now I guess and hope everybody's hearing me. So very welcome from all of us, and also from those of you who are online. If I don't know if there are many online, but this is, as Anthony already said, we are co-chairs and we're chairing this session together with two interest groups, and some of us are here physically, some are online, and some unfortunately couldn't make it. It's a great pleasure. Anthony introduced himself from Baltimore. Norman, I will also just, he will introduce himself more in detail as a co-chair for Data for Development in a bit, but he is tuning in from Cologne, Germany. And yes, well, it's Devika here and me, physically, and Lindsay Barbieri. She unfortunately couldn't make it, but we are all the co-chairs here. And I think Norman will also say a little bit more about the Data for Development. Wonderful to have you all here. Just maybe some, before we start, some organizational things that one thing I've been asked to say is to please, if you leave before the session is over, which we hope you won't do, then please be quiet, because there is another session in the lobby where actually Devika and I were first, and then we realized happily enough that we were in the wrong room, so then we moved over here where we are now in the right place. The other thing is that in the chat you will see the link to the slides and also to the collaborative notes, and we would highly appreciate if you can, there's a table there, we could list your the attendance and register in this collaborative notes that you can access there. So that was just a very brief welcome and some practical things, and then I would like to give, well, actually, I'm continuing, but you're moving the slides, Anthony, I think. So maybe you can move forward. So the topics of today's session and the meeting objectives, of course, when we join with this very wide topic, that we will, of course, only be able to partly show you where we see that the RDA and our interest group could probably do a lot of, maybe a lot of things in a benefit to the, not solving, but at least addressing the big challenges, the grand challenges that also been topics of the plenaries that we've been attending. And we've been working on this for many years. But now today, it's basically promoting the data collection and modeling related to sustainable development. So this is what we're going to show you, the work and how this, we see how the RDA can contribute on this. And also to see critical support and collaboration and share successes and challenges sources of sustainable development for the responsible research. I will at the end tell you a little bit more about way forward, because since we handed in this session of what we're presenting today, actually a lot more things are going on that we will then also discuss and address to you at the end of this meeting. But first, wrapping up a little bit on the status of what we're doing right now, because we're also working with the council, who's also working on the Sustainable Development Goals and the mapping. Then present the current status of development of ONT SDGs, a program that's developed by Devika and her PhD students, and then look more closely at the South-South and North-South collaboration project, where we will highlight or Norman will highlight the ISSU. It's an international summer school in Uganda, which is a cooperation between, amongst others, Germany and Uganda that's been going on for past years, but also Devika will show there. So Anthony, if you can move one further, just so you get an overview of the agenda. We have 4 points. Unfortunately, one presentation had to be canceled. I hope he will be able to be here in the next plenary. That's the last one. But we will just do a very brief introduction. Basically, I will not say so much more on the Sustainable Development Interest Group, because Anthony will then take over and he will present a lot of the things and the status and who we are and how we've been moving on. But Norman will briefly say something about the status of the data for development. Then we will look at, in the next point, aligning the RDA SDGs with policies and applications and challenging extending the RDA work. And there we will give you some examples of what we've tried to align and where we see that the interest groups and the working groups of the RDA can give a contribution. And that becomes particularly visible in then what Evika will show in the next. So that's the point 2. So that where Anthony and Devika will take over in a bit. Then the presentation on the East Africa capacity building that Norman will present with his team. They are not here, but he will talk on the behalf of the whole group. And then, as I said, the South-South and North-South collaboration. We aim to finalize all this within the time, because we really want to have a discussion with you and a feedback from your various experiences, also to hear how you see how this is working and moving forward and how we are on track, and maybe also get some input and ideas of how you see we could expand the contribution. And then, as I said, we will talk and also take you on the steps that we see for future activities. So that's basically what we do. And I think, Norman, maybe you will now, before Anthony continues, would like to say hi from your side, and then also who you are and who's in your group on the data for development. Yes?
I just want to say that they have to enter their names in the collaborative notes.
Okay, but didn't I say that? I said something about the collaborative notes, and that when I said your attendance, I thought maybe that a name would be fine. But I'm happy to say it once more. Yeah.
Norman.
Yes, Norman, you can talk.
All right. Thank you so much for this opportunity. One is Mukasa Norman from Uganda. I have the opportunity to be part of the Data for Development Interest Group, in which I work with Ingvild Markman, who is presenting right now, and a couple of people from East Africa. I will mention Mahadia Tunga, who is part of D-Lab, Tanzania. They're doing a lot of work on open data and doing trainings with young girls and women in data coding. And I'm also in this group with Robert Sentamu, who has experience working on collecting data for survey in Uganda with the Afrobarometer. And we are also working with a number of people from an organization on which I am part of the secretariat, and that organization is called the East African Scientific Research Network, which has about 14 members. So in this group, we are, if I may give just a few points, what our interest group is about. We start from the point of realizing that as researchers, we are dealing with information at this time that is collected from population groups that sometimes are hidden populations, such that this data is so sensitive, yet so important for decision making. So this kind of data, in most cases, can be available, collected by NGOs, governments, but because of the sensitivity of this data, it requires a lot of skills looking forward to deal with the ethical issues that would allow in future to have this data available for researchers. When we say these kind of populations, we are talking about the vulnerable populations, and me and Ingvil are working, for example, on children born of war, which is a sensitive group of people. And for a long time, the questions there have to do with how you as a researcher can continue to create data, inform policy and evidence-based policies, but at the same time to navigate the challenges. How do you keep this data open as we are looking at those principles generally, and to share this kind of data? So I would say that we in this interest group are cognizant of the challenges of talking about fair data and open data when it comes to sensitive populations, and we are opening up to discussions and further interactions with policymakers and also academics. And widely, we are talking about data in terms of photos, in terms of social media, in terms of qualitative and quantitative data. The question to us is, how can we, moving forward, be able to have this kind of data, which is important, but yet sensitive, be dealt with in a way that we can continue to share it and protect at the same time the vulnerable people. So I hope to hear more from all of you, and also to say that we need more members in our interest group that have that focus of the issue of data poverty and need for sharing more data, but also with solutions on how to deal with issues of sensitive data. So I think for now that's very important, and that's what I can share. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Norman. And just to maybe very briefly before Anthony starts, add to that. Of course, there are already a lot of places where there's data for relevant development data from both the African continent and others. So, of course, in this context, this is the collaboration that, you try to fill a gap on the data and making other kinds of data open, because many of the countries may be also conflict related. So it's not that we focus only on the sensitive data, but actually seeing how this can all be expanded in kind of one data collection where you would be able to access all kinds of relevant data, like also Norman said, being also including the sensitive groups, because many of them, there's a lot of research done there which is absolutely not shared, and that's a challenge. So that was the historical kind of task for this. So and basically maybe just, and that's part of the final presentation that unfortunately is not taking place today, is my PhD student who is actually developing a fair care software tool at the University of Cologne in Digital Humanities with the aim of seeing if you can program thresholds when it comes to sharing data of sensitive issues, such as the children born of war. That's just one of the use cases. And he's just at the beginning, but we hope that at one of the future RDA plenaries, we will actually be able to show the results. But now, finally, I know, Anthony, to you, it's very early in the morning. Now I'll give the word to you so that we are sure that you're awake and with us.
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for all the co-organizers and all my wonderful co-chairs for being here. So as Ingvild mentioned, I'm just going to give kind of a brief overview of kind of how we started the RDA for the Sustainable Development Goals Interest Group, mostly with a very high level focus on how this relates to the UN SDG policy, as well as application of data management, data infrastructure, and curation best practices and open best practices and principles, and how the RDA outputs can be of support for these underlying issues, as well as how we have mapped some current clear alignment of how the RDA outputs, recommendations, interest groups, and working groups clearly align with the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the underlying targets and indicators. And then Devika will give an overview of how this has become more systematized into a semantic knowledge graph and semantic work and semantic mapping within the Onto SDG platform that she and her colleagues have developed. And we really look forward to your thoughts and feedback here as we kind of work through more of these semantic issues. If my slides will move forward. So we have been doing this work for a few years now. Those are all of our lovely faces. And we founded ourselves with the overarching aim to improve data management and data sharing of the SDG indicator data based on implementation and adaptation of RDA outputs within workflows surrounding the SDGs and NGO development space more broadly. So thinking about the relevant stakeholders at the national statistical offices and NGOs that are actively collecting, curating, and making this data more open and interoperable, as well as how this data is being translated into overarching development policy, as well as the kind of very nuanced underlying issues of data openness, data fairness, and the care principles for data security and data ownership and control and sovereignty. I included here a link to our goals page, as well as the work that we have done in the RDA more broadly for the RDA disciplinary page surrounding the Sustainable Development Goals, which Ingvild has championed. And I highly encourage you to take a look at that. In addition to what our group is doing internally for the Sustainable Development Goals Interest Group and Development Group, we have a lot of alignment with the RDA Council strategy, particularly highlighted in the Strategic Plan Section 4.3.4, which is to increase awareness of and identify RDA's contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals with active participation of our RDA governance bodies. I included there a link to the overarching council strategy, as well as a community memo, which highlights how we have gone about actively sort of tagging the alignment of RDA interest groups and working groups with the Sustainable Development Goals, and how that can inform both the impact of RDA within the development space, as well as the alignment of multiple international bodies, such as those within EOSC, ESIP, a number of different spaces that are either domain specific or kind of more broadly internationally. So the work that we're doing has a lot of impact across a number of different areas, and we look forward to seeing how we can continue to push this forward, both within our group, within RDA, as well as involving more international stakeholders. So now I want to kind of move into a bit of background and maybe a bit of a boots on the ground view of how the Sustainable Development Goals are actually measured and collected. So the goals themselves are operationalized by a number of different targets, and each of those targets are operationalized through underlying indicators. Think of these as essentially common data elements for measuring and monitoring how those targets of each individual goal are being met. Unfortunately, a number of these underlying indicators are not collected in a clearly interoperable or standardized way. Most often, there are not standardized or common data elements for these underlying indicators. Lately, I believe only 40% of these underlying indicators are collected using common data elements or through a level of standardized semantics. So we face not only these underlying kind of data curation principles of building standardized common data elements and clear ontologies or semantics for how these underlying indicators are collected at the sort of boots on the ground level across the globe, but also the underlying curation and fair infrastructure for how these data can be shared and made interoperable across a number of different infrastructures, and then also how they can be kind of abstracted up to be standardized in the ways in which they are monitoring how these goals are being met. In addition to the sort of underlying data semantics and the underlying data curation, there is, of course, the broader social and policy issues of how the populations that are being monitored have, return of research results, how they have control and sovereignty over their own data, how there is equity in the ways in which that underlying data infrastructure is being developed and being deployed and given access to broader populations. There's, of course, some inequities there, and then also the larger international involvement of research and institutional bodies and making certain that there's equitable access to and representation of all of those different important sensitive groups and populations as these data are being collected, as they're being shared, as they're being analyzed, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals are being translated into development policy and development projects. And so there's, of course, multiple tiers of not only data issues here, but also larger policy issues. And we aim to see how the RDA can support informing this. So at a kind of very high level, this is just a very high level snapshot of how we're thinking about how we can support mapping and demonstrating how the RDA can inform the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the underlying data curation practices. So we have a number of different, let's say, goal-focused or domain-focused working groups and interest groups that directly map to those high-level goals. Think of these as your health data interest groups, your agri-semantics and agricultural and environmental interest groups. Those directly map onto and relate to the high level goals of achieving health equity, of achieving sustainable agriculture and reducing food insecurity, of improving research infrastructure and equity. And in addition to, we have a number of different outputs or recommendations that are much more focused and mapped directly to some of those data curation and data harmonization and semantic issues that are much more at the target and indicator level. So think about clear metadata standards and semantic standards for capturing wheat or rice or agricultural data. How is sensitive data related to sensitive health populations being controlled and kept secure and being anonymized? How are health measures or health outcomes being monitored and collected in a standardized fashion, leveraging control vocabularies or existing biomedical ontologies? So we see that many goals could have relationships to both high-level goals as well as individual targets and indicators, which I'll walk through essentially an example of that now. So if we look at the goal 3, which is to achieve good health and well-being, within goal 3 is target 3.b, which is to support research and development of vaccines and medicines for communicable and non-communicable diseases that primarily affect developing countries. That is actually operationalized by underlying indicators of the proportion of a population that's vaccinated, assistance to medical research and basic health sectors, proportion of health facilities with relevant essential medicines available and affordable, most importantly. So here we see very clearly a number of different working groups and interest groups that map to not only that high level goal of good health and well-being, so such as the health data interest group, the epidemiology groups, groups of such as the HARPO group, which shout out to the HARPO group, has an output currently in community review. Highly suggest you take a look at that. But there's also clear guidance and recommendations and outputs that map directly to the ways in which those indicators that operationalize that target are monitored, are made interoperable, are made fair, and made clearly curated and shareable across a number of different infrastructures. So that is essentially our high-level goal of how we want to achieve some of this mapping of our RDA working groups, interest groups, and activities more broadly to demonstrate how we as RDA and a community more broadly can directly inform and support how these goals are being collected, how the targets and indicators are being measured, and those data are being collected and shared, as well as get to more rapidly a space where we could actually monitor the achievement of the goals with the aim of course, meeting the goals and satisfying the goals and progressing development more broadly. But we need to kind of, start small and start seeing how we can demonstrate clear alignment that exists already. We're very lucky to have council supporting our activities, and a number of different groups across the RDA also supporting our activities, but we look forward to hearing more broadly from you all today. Of course, there's not only kind of broader domain specifics such as health or agri-semantics or agriculture or ecology, but there's underlying there's a number of underlying more kind of broad infrastructure and research recommendations, outputs, working groups, and interest groups that directly align with underlying targets, such as how do we build sustainable research data repositories and business models? How do they implement the trust principles and the care principles for data sovereignty and control? How do we support persistent identifier types and making certain that those persistent identifiers are implemented in a standardized way across a number of different either centralized or federated ecosystems across the globe? And then how can we potentially make the ways in which this data is being collected and managed and shared more transparent, given some of the high sensitivity and high policy concerns here. So there's a number of different ways in which the RDA are and the work of all of your excellent groups can clearly apply to and directly inform the ways in which the UN and the relevant stakeholders and bodies are collecting and managing this data, as well as the ways in which this data is analyzed and translated into policy decisions. So that's really kind of a high level view of what our aim is. We conducted some surveys of the RDA community because we really wanted to see who is aware of the ways in which their work within their RDA interest groups or working groups or just broader activities in their day-to-day work already aligns with the SDGs, because we are relatively intimately aware of what the SDGs are, how they're collected, how they're operationalized. But we began to realize that maybe we just need to, see in who is aware of the ways in which their work already aligns with the SDGs, and how can we help demonstrate the ways in which it is actually already aligned with the SDGs, and how can we kind of promote some more community engagement and demonstrate that many people are already doing work that can directly inform and support the ways in which the SDGs are being monitored. They need not change any of their daily working or daily research focus. It can already clearly be useful, and we basically just wanted to see how we could support broader community awareness and community engagement around this work. So here we just have a very quick clustering of to see of RDA interest group and working group community members and co-chairs who is explicitly incorporating the SDGs into their everyday work, who is indirectly incorporating the SDGs into their everyday work, who sees maybe some relevancy. Here we can see that very broad cluster of groups that they think that their work can be relevant, but it's not necessarily explicitly addressed in their everyday work. And then some see it as not relevant to their everyday work at all. We want to see how maybe we could demonstrate that 23% may actually be quite smaller, and that there might be some clear direct relevancy, and we just need to maybe tease that out some more. This is essentially just a clustering of working group, interest group members and co-chairs based around those high-level goals. Here we can see a number of different working groups and interest groups that directly are working around improving access to quality education. There's a number of groups addressing good health and well-being, as well as those underlying industry and innovation and infrastructure and climate action. So we're starting to see some clustering around these high-level goals. Though we know we by no means aim to dismiss, those that might be addressing goals that are still very important, such as decent work and economic growth. There's a number of economists within RDA and a number of working groups that are developing some economic outputs. We want to make certain that we're representing those groups as well. But we do see some sort of areas of high clustering, and that could be maybe some low-hanging fruit and ways in which we could start getting some community engagement and some snowballing of community activity to really cluster around maybe a few goals and demonstrate the ways in which work could be translated to UN or NGO stakeholders, or demonstrated and implemented into some recommended guidance and curation policies or some other white papers or sorts. So we see a lot of great clustering here. This is essentially just the same demonstrating the ways in which this is relevant to a number of different working group and interest group activities. So basically, we wanted to see how we could tease out some of this existing relationships in which RDA interest groups, working groups, outputs and recommendations directly map to those high-level goals, as well as underlying indicators and targets, and begin this work manually, leveraging our own subject matter expertise in our own domains, and started to manually map interest groups, working groups, outputs, and recommendations, leveraging information that's on those interest group and working group charters, as well as some of the information that is in the Zenodo platform, and manually reviewing those and mapping those. But what Devika has been able to do is make this work much more systematic, leveraging lots of excellent NLP and some semantic mapping in her group, and her colleagues have done some excellent work that we're really excited to continue exploring and building upon. So I think if comfortable, I can go ahead and pass it off to Devika at this point to talk about her work in Onto SDG, and I can continue moving the slides, Devika.
You can hear. Thanks, Anthony. And hi, everybody. So you heard when I entered this group and heard what Anthony and Ingvill and others were already doing in this IG, I was a little late entering. By training, I am I'm in knowledge organization. So naturally, my mind went to how I could organize all this and take an ontology approach to this. And that was the how it originated, that I started working on something called Onto SDG. You can go ahead, Anthony. You're changing the slides for me, right? Thank you.
Did that change on your end? If there's a lag, let me
Yeah,
know.
you can go ahead. Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah. So that is how it looks. Yeah, the next one also. Please go to the next one. Yeah. Yeah, Anthony is actually sitting at one more conferences, the lives we live today. So he has some network issues. So Onto SDG is this. It is accessible at that URL for those who are interested. It presents a semantic infrastructure for representation of the UN SDGs, the targets and indicators. And what it enables is the interlinking of the goals with respective projects, maybe initiatives, labs, and whatever outcomes of different groups. So the objective really is in the end, a semantic analysis of the data to help assess the extent of implementation and relation of different work to, and the final objective is, of course, to see the impact of SDGs themselves. So that was the broad objective with which I started working on the Onto SDG. And then we, yes, Anthony, the next one. We thought we will, that was a generic work that I started, which is Onto SDG, applicable to anything. But when I started working with RDA, we modeled it for RDA, the outcomes of the working groups and the interest groups. So that's how it looks at a high level. We have the classes by the basically, we go by the output or the recommendation of each group that has been reported, and then we modeled it that way with 9 classes. Yeah, go ahead, please. We took each of the 17 goals and then mapped them to their respective targets and the indicators within. I don't know. I don't assume knowledge of the UN SDGs from all of you, because it is maybe a 100-page document if you print it out, and we don't expect everybody knows about every target and the indicator. And well, honestly speaking, I don't understand jargon myself that goes into the UN SDGs. So what we tried to do is sort of systematize them and make like a framework. And I'll in a moment show a simplified like a Google form with which our co-chairs and co-chairs from RDA community and even members can interact with the system and give us the input that we need. Yeah, you can go ahead, Anthony. So within each target, we have, within each goal are the targets, and within the targets, again, it opens up into the indicators, and there under each of the facilities that we have created, we there itself give a little bit of annotation of what. So like I said, we don't expect people to know all the 100 pages of what UN SDG defines it. Yeah, go ahead, and maybe we can just show the KG, the knowledge graph, so that makes more sense. The next one, please. The next one. Yeah, this is how the model looks in an image. So we start with the goals, then the fan out to the 17 SDG. And like I said, we always, we have taken the outcome or the output of RDA as a publication of some kind, and that works through an agent. The agent could be the actual, maybe they have an assigned person of contact or the IG and the WG itself. And then they link back to the target and the indicators. And then we have some basic minimum metadata that we could put in at this moment. Yeah, you can go ahead. So, for example, take the SDG 13 that has to do with climate and climate change, and it has like the targets there are 3 and 2 sub-targets that are defined by the UN, and then that opens up into several indicators. Yeah, please go ahead. So I know that this looks complicated and people, I don't expect that they will give the input. So we created an input interface like this, which is simply like a Google form. And we solicit the input of the chairs and the co-chairs of the different IGs and the WGs to give us input here. So it's simple that form actually doesn't work now. You can simply go from the generic, the URL that I showed and enter it. Please don't use this one. I'm sorry, this is not updated. Yeah, go to the next one. Here. So here are the listings of the IGs and by the domains, so they can pick it up. They can say that my IG deals with 1, 2, or whatever of these, and then map it to the goals. On the other side, you can see that we have listed all the goals, so they can drill down. So when you actually enter this form, it looks a little bit intimidated because on the top you'll see a horizontal screen saying there are 20 pages to the form. But no, you don't have to go sequentially to the 20 pages because it depends on what goal you choose, and then it just leads you to where we want the input directly. So you can go ahead. So that's how it works. Yeah, please go ahead. I'll go to the second. Yeah. Now that was work that we did a few months back, right up to the last plenary, I can say. And then we tried to engage. We want to engage with the co-chairs and the co-chairs and get their input, and that's taking its time. We know that we are all researchers and academics and we are very busy. So then we thought of approach 2, where we went ahead and did a kind of parsing of the outcomes and outputs and tried to map it on our own by using some kind of a low intensity parsing, if you please, if I may. So you can go ahead, Anthony. So we got data again from the RDA outcomes. We of course took, we consulted resources like Zenodo, the Zenodo repository. You'll be surprised, the Zenodo keywords didn't always map with the groups, anything to do with SDGs. And when I saw when you or I can clearly see there is some kind of a connect, but the keywords were not that much helpful. That was one learning from the exercise. So we just took the outcomes, we passed them, and then on the other end, we did the same with the SDG vocabulary and the language. So we took all the 17 SDGs and their targets and the indicators together, one goal at a time, and then we passed it. And the output looks like this. The next slide, please. Yeah, this is what we arrived at. So we arranged it by some ID. And here I have to thank Ferris. He's called Ferris Ane of Canada, who had already done some work with the RDA Council. I think you people saw a very nice document giving pathways in this plenary. And that was the work of Ferris, who did some mapping of all the work that we do in the different IGs and the WGs, and then he mapped it to those pathways. That's the work he did. Now I took a leaf out of that work and said that we can take that approach to doing this work. And so we parsed in the way that he did both the RDA outcomes, the RDA outcomes and outputs, the case statements on the RDA side, and on the SDG side, we took all the vocabulary that comes with the SDG set. So that's what we did. And the extraction looks like this. And then you can go ahead, please. Yeah. So this is the final output that we got by each SDG and what group or IG or WG of RDA maps with which SDG. There has been no human intervention, so there could be mistakes here. We wanted to show it as is, because this is the result of the direct, the mapping out of the machine, not people. But this is the effort that we wanted to show that we did. Yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah, so you can see, obviously reduced inequality is directly to do with us, data for development group, but it is saying there's nothing matching with it at the moment. There is work to be done in harmonizing the vocabulary and then getting better results. But at the moment, this is what the mapping looks like. Yeah. So Yeah, you can go ahead. So that is the kind of work we have done so far. And like King Will said, and it will be part of the discussion, which I won't be part of. So I'll say it now, that we expect, we solicit inputs from you all in validating this and in telling us how we could improve this, how we could get a more focus into this work of mapping, because today we are at a manageable level of outputs and recommendations. At one point, I think it'll be huge. And then we need to develop the system which we could do at least a semi-automatic process to start really relating with the RDA outcomes, relating with the SDGs. So that's what I wanted to say to you about this. Thank you.
I think at this time, I'll stop sharing and pass the control to Peter to pull up the next slides, if that's correct.
Challenges in this so to the audience is that, of course, all the material that we can use to analyze the impact of the RDA on the SDGs is dependent on the information that is provided and how updated and correct. It doesn't have to be using the SDG language, because that's not the purpose, but of course that would help if you kind of would link it to keywords. And these are things and processes that I'll come back to in the end. But now my microphone is working again. So I don't see Norman anymore. Norman, do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. So Norman, since we, so I suggest, so now you are basically talking in two presentations, one you have with Devika, and since we want to have time for discussion, I know you don't have many slides, but maybe you can still keep in time pretty fast, and then we can return to questions that may be online or on site afterwards and have more time, but so that we make sure that we have enough time for discussion. So if you take many loops, I may intervene in between, okay?
Yeah, the slides I thought are going to be pulled up from that side. That's what I was guided.
Yeah, he's working
Okay,
on it.
perfect,
It's there.
perfect. Thank you.
You see it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I
So
see that.
please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, maybe for introduction, the first slide was trying to say who we are in this presentation and what the focus is. There's been a lot happening in the last years, starting around 2018, where we're working on collaborative efforts to promote capacity building and research in Uganda, working with the North, and that is particularly Germany, and also looking at the issue of how do we maneuver currently the challenges of data availability for research and policy making, especially in the context as our own in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. And we identified together with colleagues in universities that come together into an organization, a network called East African Scientific Research Network. And in this network, our goal is to have a critical mass of individuals who can use research and community engagement to solve the problems that Africa, and in particular East Africa, is facing. So in doing so, the issues that confront us today are that we need to utilize the open access and open data platforms. We need to equip ourselves as researchers to communicate our research effectively with the community and have an impact. And that is still a challenge. Then also the integrity of research that is produced, and therefore being able to make sound evidence-based recommendations that are really grounded in data, and this to us was identified as a challenge. But beyond that, the bigger challenge that we also came across and wanted to work towards was that there was a need for capacity within universities, largely, and researchers, that's the research community within East Africa, to deal with the current issues of research, cognizant of the need for data sharing and open data. So then we, as a solution, looked at two issues, and those I will be presenting on those in the next slide. That is capacity building and networking. Yes, so our initiatives with capacity building, as an individual, I was lucky to have previous connections to GESI's Institute for Social Sciences, where I was lucky also at the same time to apply through their processes of grants to have a research stay in which I presented the issues of research in East Africa and the need to work towards a data infrastructure through which we could be able then to promote research in terms of training and also in answering the critical issues of data sharing. And the starting point was we needed to increase the capacity of researchers in East Africa to be able to deal with survey. And that we came up with courses, including Introduction to Survey Methodology. We realized the challenge of data management. And then we also designed a course on that same issue of data methodology. And all this, we worked around it in the framework of summer schools. Launched a proposal that was funded by VW Foundation. And the idea was to work closely in a north-south relationship in which the experts from Europe and coordinated largely by GESI's Institute of Social Sciences to support the development of these courses. And then Mutesa, the First Royal University, which is one of the universities that is a member to the East African Scientific Research Network, to host the trainings. What we did along the way was not only to prepare for the summer schools, but also to engage with stakeholders. We had several meetings with entities there, or stakeholders, including the data collection body in Uganda. We made networks with Kenyan data collecting agency, and also worked closely with the D-Lab Tanzania, which is an NGO housed in Dar es Salaam University that is training young girls and also researchers in data coding and other aspects of managing data. So within a span of 2 years, 1 year, sorry, before actually launching the project, we did a lot of consultations, and then we came up with a program that mimicked the summer school program at GESIS, but adapted to the East African setting. And in this summer school, to be more exact, was focused on 4 courses, some of which I've mentioned: Introduction to Survey and Data Management, Cross-Cultural Survey, and all were geared towards promoting survey methodology and data management. We have until now had 2 cohorts that have been trained. Those are 120 people, mainstream training, but along the way we have engaged with stakeholders who are more than 20 stakeholders who are dealing in research. And we have had a lot of activities on the sidelines that have changed a lot in terms of perspectives and training different groups within members of the East African Scientific Research Network on how to do responsible research, and also how to integrate sustainable development indicators and to understand them. Of course, the challenge is still there. We can't say we have achieved all that we intended. So what have we done that is likely to get us to the next step is we created interactions between especially the trainers. So we had trainers from Germany and elsewhere who had renowned and recognized competences and were willing to travel to Africa to share those competences. And they worked closely with co-lecturers from East Africa. That was, according to us, a very, very new dynamics within our trainings. And we take that as a not only learning experience, but also a benefit in cross-cultural learning. And we have created a network, which is the second output that I talk about here. What we have done is this founded network, and the links are available for those who want to reach out to see at least what the goals are and objectives of the network. The network now constitutes 17. The number is still growing every day of institutions that come as with representatives. So it's an institution-based network. And the common interest here in our goal is to be able to create a critical mass of people in East Africa that can solve Africa's problems, but with a focus of promoting values such as open data, fair data principles being applied, and responsible research, so to speak. So we could move to the next slide. So having gone that step in 2 years, we had the first cohort trained in 2019 and the second cohort in 2022. We moved on to think about the next steps. And the next steps that we realized during COVID, with the consultation and much discussions that included Ingville, there was that we would move towards including a module that is a digital module, digitalized materials. So we convert all the materials of the summer school into open access materials that East African academics and students would access and use. So along this program was processes such as designing the materials, then evaluating them with the partners in East Africa and piloting them. And as we speak today, these materials are accessible and they are in an open access platform of areas. And we have what we call data champions in our universities who are trying to create what is called a community of practice. Sort of one person that was trained will be able to change the way research is done in the institution, and therefore creating, scaling our outcomes and creating the critical mass that we are talking about. So that's our plans, and we want to offer continuity and a sustainable capacity building program. We have learned that our design of the summer school that we launched was a good start, but we need to move forward with continuous trainings, which may, and as we plan, involve more now of the local people who have benefited from the training, so they can then extend the knowledge they have had through this network arrangement. And also along the way, we expect that there will be continuous and continued interactions with GESIS and other institutions, but in an additional and new direction, which will be in the lines of data archiving and more towards, if you may, data management, which will then incorporate other goals of the network that are in the lines of how we increase the availability of data. And this again connects to the Data for Development Interest Group, which, as I spoke at the start, has the interest in being able to navigate the challenges of data within those contexts of developing countries. So we have learned that these skills are going to be needed continuously, and they need to be systematic. There are challenges which are on the next slide that I'm going to go to, that in as much as we have these plans, or I need to speak about one of the best practice in our collaboration. As I spoke about the networks that we have built, the 17 members, these are institutions of research as universities and institutions that are largely doing survey and data collection. They are doing more of training. So one of those is DLab Tanzania, whose work I've singled out here, but there are many that are doing extraordinary work that we want to tap into as a network. So with DLab's expertise, we have continued to train locally within East Africa. So how have we done this? Is one, in the summer school arrangement, we used 2, if not 3, of the experts from DLab to work closely with the trainers from, one was from Canada and another one from Germany, to create dynamics of learning that bring together people from the north and people from the south, and then trying to understand also the challenges and the dynamics of training people on the in East Africa, on the African continent, if you may, at large. So the speciality of DLab is more in the lines of open data. They are looking at responsible AI. They are looking at data science, and much connected to changing communities, such as a focus on girls and coding. So these are competences that we expect that are going to be shared within East Africa. But that is what we look at in the future, how we are going to match competences of institutions to support the entire goal of the network. So that's a case that I wanted to talk about. The challenges are coming in the next slide. These are capacity gaps and what we lack or need. So we have realized that in our interest of developing capacities, we have realized the lack of senior research trainers and mentors. And this relates, if you may, to also the statistics that we see today that state that the African continent contributes only about 1% of the scientific research. We see other numbers also in the line of the contribution and the progress around open data. So all these aspects, in a way, are linked to the scientists that are there and the expertise, which we are much thinking that requires the approach that we have taken, for example, of being able to work on jointly on projects, which now takes me to the second bullet of North-South engagements. The challenges in the North-South engagements are that most of them are short-lived and will not solve these systematic problems, as I've said, especially those that we could think require, for example, an overhaul of some of the system and huge investments in the infrastructure that is required to support responsible research. But these are challenges that are not hard to overcome. So the issue is then looking towards how can you have long-term sustainable undertakings that will show you along a period of time how much effect you have attained through this. And I think that's where our networks come in. And that's the last bullet. It's also not without challenges. When you have South-South partnerships, what we have seen along the way is that there is also need to enter into negotiations and the discussions around the accreditation of the trainings that you give, such that they are supporting the training that is available, and they are, of course, then relevant. The joint awards and then mobility programs that are supported locally and that can be not only North-South, but also South-South mobilities. So I think in the interest of time, and we can have further discussions on these issues, but that's how we have moved with this project of trying to bridge the gap in skills and to create a critical mass of researchers that have the capacities to solve the challenges of evidence-based research and also do this in a responsible way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norman. In interest of time, I think now, Devika, you will very briefly now also go into the South-South collaboration and things. And I think, Norman, because we would like to have some time for discussion, it's only 20 minutes left. I think many of the issues you raised from your things we can take up in the discussion then, but then Devika, you can show the things that you're working on with UNESCO.
You can advance the slide. I'll tell
have
you.
a clicker up there, but yeah.
Yeah, two
Two more. Okay. Just give me 1 second because Norman is controlling the. I'm just going to take the control back.
Sorry, I have to switch off.
Yeah, so you just use the microphone to, if he's controlling the slide, you can just.
but no, you can't do it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, did we go back? Or is this the right one?
No, we went back. Yeah, now you can progress to the next one. Next slide. Next one. Next one, please. Next one, please. Yeah, but we're missing something. Yeah, one up.
One more?
No, you have to go to.
Okay. You-
Okay.
Yeah.
So I still am missing a slide. I don't know how, but anyway, this was planned to be after Norman's few introductory slides, but then I'll now simply jump in because I'm consulting with UNESCO to bring up a policy brief on the South-South and North-South collaborations. There, the scope of work is limited to open access to information issues and some on open data and leading to open science, but mainly on open access issues. So what we are looking at the issues for the policy brief are these things like what are the policy, OA policy approaches, mostly and they were whether they were following the bottom-up approach, like training researchers, training library staff to bring up to build capacities in hosting repositories, in populating them, and this approach was taken for a long time. And now this policy brief will look at what could be the top-down approach, where we involve policymakers at the institutional level and even at the governmental level, how we could sort of engage with them to bring out OA policies at that level. The other pillar would be the ICT, to build capacities in ICT and what is the work that needs to be done before to realize the goals of SDGs, of course, before 2030. And how the other important pillar is how we could, the OA community could support what is called as the diamond or the non-commercial open access system. I have a problem with the word diamond because it intrinsically means it's something for the rich people. So I prefer to call it non-commercial open access instead of diamond open access. So anyway, that's the third pillar that we are looking at when we are developing the policy document. The fourth pillar is metrics. So again, I don't, if you ask me personally, I don't think metrics are really an indicator of quality. They could never be an indicator of quality of anything, but they're used to as to represent an indicator of quality by measuring citations. So anyway, since the word is used to that, there should be also metrics for open content, which is, in my opinion, a very nascent and very much unexplored area, where open content metrics we should make a big foray and be considered at least on par with the other metrics that are considered to be used for evaluating content right now, mostly subscription-based content. Okay, we can go to the next one, please. Yeah, this is the policy brief that I'm working on. It is in a draft mode right now, and it is with the UNESCO for their comments. And once it goes to the one round of comments from the UNESCO and adjustments, we will be opening this up for comments more widely, and you people as the members of the Data for Development IG will also get a communication from us, and we will be asking for your inputs before for the policy brief. That this policy brief basically aims to end up in recommendations, of course, some recommendations, but more focused call for action, what needs to be done urgently. So in there you will find certain things that we have put as call for action, but we would always solicit inputs on that. And going forward, the next slide, please. Yeah. So this is a platform that is, again, very, very, very recent as yesterday. We thought of there should be a platform which would help us to engage with the whole community, be it institutes, initiatives, researchers, administrators, funders, basically anyone who has an interest in open science with an emphasis on Global South. We want to engage with them. You can see repeatedly the URL is saying GoUp. I didn't introduce GoUp to you, sorry. It is the Global Open Access Platform. for which I am the principal investigator consulting again for UNESCO. We host it there in India. But this is a collaborative effort between UNESCO, ourselves, and Redalic America of Mexico. So it is an example already of South-South collaboration. If you want, you can go and visit the GoUp and see we have mapped all the work and all the initiatives that are going on in open access worldwide. On the same platform, we wish to host what is the Global South Open Science Cooperation Forum, and this will also be having a discussion link if you go in there. And I would request you people to visit here and then become members, not just yet. Please give us this week, and then I will have this tested and then come back to you with it. But by next week, you could just go and get yourself registered over here. So that's the next offering we'll be having, because it's very important to start a dialogue in our view, which has, I mean, you have been in various rooms over here for the past 2-3 days now, and you hear the conversation. I have been with RDA from Plenary 1 till now. I was here in Gothenburg for Plenary 1, and you saw the A4 paper with an arrow mark with, so I had to find the venue with those A4 papers there. It was not so easy. Life is much easier now. So from then I have been hearing now and then a mention of how we could be inclusive, how we must be inclusive, and things like this. I'm sure the intentions are there, but it didn't turn out into anything so concrete at all so far. So we still hear a lot of discussions from maybe North America, maybe Europe, maybe Australia. It's not wrong because most of the members come from there, but then there is a whole half globe that we are leaving out, half part of the earth, which is the global south, and there are many issues. I have gone into those issues in the report itself, which I'm writing for the UNESCO. And there are issues on one side, but then there is offerings on the other side. It has rich content. There's so much, even if you take the research into pandemics and how they break out and how the studies are going on. There's some valuable things to be learned from the global south that the whole globe can learn, so that we don't lose so many lives in the next upcoming pandemic if it is around the corner. So there's much to be shared, to be learned, and that's being left out. That is my own concern always. That's exactly why I always stress that we cannot leave the global south behind. For their sake as well as for the sake of the global north. So this is exactly why we want to host this platform, to engage with a wide community and gather all the thinking around this. And we want to make it thematic based and time based, like have a weekly topic or a monthly topic where people can contribute, and then we consolidate that and see where it goes. So that's the objective. Next one, please. So I think Norman has already covered this, so I just hand it over for the discussion.
Exactly. So thank you very much, Deb, because yeah, it's very interesting. Norman, I will, since you already talked about the summer school and we only have 10 minutes left, I would like to open the floor for questions that you can add on, because I think the pictures speak for themselves and you already talked about it. So I would, Jen, just I don't know if we can get see Norman and get the other Norman and Anthony back on screen. Yes. So okay, so you see there's a lot of things going on, somehow related but in different activities. It just occurred to me when I was listening to Norman and the information about the D-Lab, and that's a typical example of activities going on related to one of the interest group, like in this case, data for development. But as you can remember from Devika's presentation, there was an X and no finding relating to gender equality issue on the SDG, and which I thought was really interesting, because that shows basically some of the issues we're having if information is not updated, even in our case, addressing, then you don't find it. Yeah, so that's I just wanted to emphasize this. But please go ahead and ask preferably any of these nice men here on if you have any questions or issues or comments or suggestions or recommendations. We will be very happy to try. Yes. Oh, yeah, you need no.
Hi, thank you for this session. It was really interesting. I'm Sophie Meus. I work at Master Botanic Garden in Belgium, and I'm the RDA EOSC Future Domain Ambassador for Biodiversity. And so there is an interest group on biodiversity data integration, and I saw it popping up with the SDGs, especially 15, life on land, and there was a cross with life underwater, below water. I think it's also accurate there, even though you didn't find it, but the biodiversity group is really about all biodiversity. So I think, well, this group currently is a bit inactive, even though one of the chairs is here, and we are thinking in bringing it back to life. And I think we can definitely contribute and by filling out the form. So I will try to do that, if that helps.
Yeah, that would be perfect. And this is exactly the link that Devika has. And since you have the slides, you can go in because because we've tested it and we try to make it as user-friendly as possible. But basically, this is exactly what we're hoping for, to get interested chairs and groups to go in and fill in the form. And even if you have recommendations with regard to what may need to, be found or changed or whatever, also do this. But I think this is a very good way, and your point, and as also Devika said, the analysis that we've done so far has not been controlled by human. As we know, machines don't think completely by themselves. So it needs this interaction. So that would be great. And if you have questions, just reach out.
Okay.
To us when you do it, but that would be great. We will send out to all chairs also when following this, because talking about the way forward in September, Connie Claire yesterday said that they're having, in a part of the 10th years anniversary, we're having activities every month or several per month. And one we're having in planning is responsible research, SDG workshop. And for the time being, I think it's set for September. So a lot of the analysis on this merging thing is gonna take place also in the upcoming months after the plenary. So it would be perfect to have a much more updated basis that we could then also show and continue with. And by the way, to be honest, working with UN I think it's also part of a possible business model to actually show what the RDA can contribute to the UN and at the UN level in terms of SDGs. So I also think that would be is also a very good tool. Any others? So thanks. And
can I add something more? Well, so I'm also a data steward at the Botanic Garden, and our researchers are working together a lot with the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because, well, it used to be a colony. So we have a lot of history there and still a lot of collaborations. So they come to me, well, they have to publish their data in the end, and they come to me and I have to help them with publishing their data. So it's always difficult because there are African partners involved and they didn't make good agreements at the start of the project. So what I tend to do, but I would love to hear comments, is to advise them to set up these memorandum of collaborations with the people there, with the local partners, and really indicate what the data, where the data will go, what it will be used for, and also add an aspect of capacity building. I think that's also important. So that's what I do.
Really important. I think that, I don't know if Norman has any thoughts or Anthony on that issue, but I think that, I just have a question. So where do they have the data then? So is that does it stay in the country, or is it, does it go out, or how is it handled now?
Well, in our case, it's often plants that are being collected.
Mhm.
And then what we tend to do is, and this is also something you have to describe in this kind of collaboration documents, is that you always take duplicates of plants, and one we take back to Belgium, and one is staying in the country, in the local herbarium. But then there are things like DNA sequences. Can you publish them, or whose property are these data, and these kind of things that should be sorted out, I think, in the beginning of these projects.
Which is one of the challenges of international collaboration.
Yes.
We worked on the memorandums of understanding with Uganda. Norman, do you have any things to add on to that, or suggestions? But I'm surprised that it's not always already kind of guidelines actually working on that.
No, I don't have much of a direct support, but I would just maybe add that yeah, the guidelines in most of the arrangements are some of the countries even in our network, and even researchers, I may say, let me be clear, will ask you of guidelines, whether they are available on the internet. That's another thing. But the knowledge that this information is there, I think, is critical. There may be guidelines to compare between cases. That's also something to put into consideration. And I think networks like ours could do some work in terms of sensitizing and bringing or collecting guidelines into one portal for people to know. And that's the community of practice idea, I think, that we promote, sort of.
Maybe it's even something that we should catch up on here in the RDA, in a much more, like push and
Yes.
something like a standardized. We will have some discussions on that in the chairs meeting tomorrow. So maybe we can, if there's some kind of standardized tools, guides that would work across disciplines. Okay. Any other issues with 2 minutes, 1 minute? There's room for a very brief input or comment or questions. If not, I will, no, 2 minutes. If not, it's last chance. I will close the session for today. Thank you all so much for coming. As I said, we will reach out and ask all groups to continue filling in and providing the information. The council will get out with, I think, wishes that all groups also check that the case statements and the charters are also always updated. Like in the case, like Norman said in the beginning, we're a typical example. Data for development was much broader in the beginning. And when we established the SDG interest group, we redefined the contents and the focus of the data for development to be much more on data for developing countries, because we didn't need 2 overlapping groups. But then, of course, we needed to adjust the charter in addition, because otherwise it doesn't fit. And as we all know, that if you want to analyze something, the basis you use for the analysis is crucial for the quality of the output. That's why we're all here. So thank you very much. Thank you, Norman and Anthony. Wish you all a continuous successful RDA, and feel free to reach out to us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
So bye-bye, Anthony and Norman.
Okay,
Okay.
bye-bye.
I need to run to my next meeting, but I'll talk to you all via email and everything. I look forward to continuing. Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
so
we
much.
don't have to continue conference here. We're having coffee break. I think we need that
Good
now.
deal. Good deal. Enjoy your